Okay, welcome to Intro to C Programming. Today we are going to write a program using functions. So here's the program that we are going to write. Prompt the user to enter 2 times in military format, hour, then minutes, then seconds, where the hour goes from 0 up to 23. And then we're going to display whether the first time is before the second, after the second, or is the same as the second. And we're going to use functions to determine the output. So this isn't that difficult of a program to write. However, we are going to try to get some practice using functions today. So we're going to try to use a few different functions, create our own, and use a few more. So open up Visual Studio, and then click on New Project. I'm going to name the project Functions. Make sure you select Win32 Console Application. And in Application Settings, select Empty Project, leave it on Console Application, then click Finish. Okay, when your Solution Explorer comes up, right-click on Source File, say Add New Item, and I'm going to name this as the CPP file, and I'll just name it functions.cpp. And I should get my window here so that I can start writing code. Okay, if I want to do any kind of input or output in my program, I need to include the standard io.h file, and then the entry point to all of my C programs is the main function. Now that we've actually learned functions, you know a little bit more about what this syntax means. It means that there is no return type coming back from the main function. The name of the function is main, and there are no parameters that are being passed into the function. Okay, looking at our program, what we want to do here is we want to prompt the user to enter 2 times in military format, hour, then minutes, then seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some variables here. I'm going to call it hour 1, minute 1, second 1, and then I'll create an hour 2, minute 2, and second 2. Okay, we want to start utilizing other functions that we write on our own. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function called getHour, and it's going to prompt the user to say, please enter the hour. And then it's going to read the value from the user, and then we're going to send it back to the main function. So let's just come up above the main function here, and I'm going to create a function called getHour, and we won't pass any parameters into it, and we're going to return an integer. So I'm going to create one variable here. I'll name it h, and it'll be an integer, and I'm going to say please enter the hour, and then I'm going to read that into this variable h that I have, and then I'm going to return h. Now, I'm returning h, which is an integer, and you see that the return type of the getHour function is int. So this abides by what I want. I'm returning a value along all paths of execution through the function. There's only one path through. It's going to come straight down from the top to the bottom. There's no loops, there's no if statements, conditionals, anything like that. So it's going to return whatever value the user types in. Now in my main function, I want to get that value. The way that I get access to a value returned from a function is I have to set a variable equal to that function. So when I set hour1 equal to getHour, this is a function that I'm calling. I'm calling it, the way I know it's a function is because I have the parentheses after it here. So I know that I'm calling a function. The name of the function is getHour. I'm not passing any parameters into the function, and it's going to return an integer to me. The value that gets returned from that function is going to go into this variable hour1. So the value that's going to get returned, though, is going to be whatever the user typed in, because inside of this function, it prompts the user, says, hey, enter the hour, and then it reads that value from the user, and that's the value that gets returned to me. So I don't know, as of right now, what that value is going to be. However, what I do know is that it's going to be an integer. And so I'm putting it back into an integer variable inside of the main function. Scoping is an important issue to understand. Since this variable h right here was declared inside of the getHour function, we only have access to the variable h inside of that function. These variables down here, hour 1 and 2, minute 1 and 2, second 1 and 2, are declared inside of the main function. We only have access to them inside of the main function. What that means is that I cannot do anything with hour 1 up here. You see that if I try to use hour 1, it says error, identifier hour 1 is undefined. It's outside of the scope. The scope of the hour 1 variable is only inside of the main function, so I can't do that. So the way that I can get access to the value that was entered inside of that function, though, is by returning the value and then putting it back into a variable. So there's hour 1. I'm going to create a get minute and a get second function, which are going to be very similar to that. The difference is that I am going to name my variable m, and I'm going to say please enter the minute. Scan in another integer, but put that into my variable m, and then return m. And the second is going to work very similar to that also. Okay, now down here, this is where it's going to start getting a little interesting for us. Now, what I can do is I can put minute 1. I can get minute 1 just by calling the function get minute, and then I can get the value of second 1 just by calling the function get second. Now, where it gets even better is that the same code, it's this exact same code as how I would get the value of hour 2, minute 2, and second 2. So what I can do is I can just call the function again, and instead of putting it back into hour 1, I'm then going to put it into hour 2. So instead of having to say, please enter the hour, the minute, the second, and then again, please enter the hour, the minute, the second, instead, I'm just going to call the code that already exists. And instead of putting it back into hour 1, instead, I'm going to put it into hour 2, minute 2, and second 2. So now what I've done is I've reduced the amount of code that we as the programmers need to type, and if something needs to be changed, I can just change it in one place because it's going to get reflected anytime that I call that function now. So now I have the hour, the minute, and the second for my time 1, and I have the hour, the minute, and the second now for my time 2. The next part of my program is I need to display whether the first time is before the second, after the second, or the same as the second. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a function that returns an integer. We're going to call it compare, and it's going to take two variables as parameters. We'll call it val1 and val2. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if val1 is less than val2, I'm going to return a -1. If val1 is greater than val2, I'm going to return a 1. And otherwise, I'm going to return a 0. And this would be if val1 equals val2. Then I'll return a 0. Okay? So now I'm going to call this compare function. And the way that I'm going to determine whether my time 1 comes before my time 2 is first I'm going to compare my hours. If hour 1 is less than hour 2, that means that time 1 is going to be less than time 2. It's earlier in the day, right? Only if they're the same do I need to move on to check my minutes, and only if the hours and the minutes are the same do I need to move on to check my seconds. So I've created this nice little function for me that I can use to compare all of those values. So what I'm going to do here is say if, let me take that back, I'm going to create another variable called, I'll call this my comparison variable. And I'll say my comparison variable is going to get the value that comes back from compare when I pass in hour 1 and hour 2. If comparison is equal to -1, then what can I conclude? Then I conclude that time 1 is earlier than time 2. And I'm done. If comparison equals a 1, then what can I conclude? Time 1 is later than time 2. And then return. Now, only if neither one of those happens am I ever going to get to this line of code, because I have return statements inside of each of those ifs. So the only time that I'm ever going to get to the line of code where my cursor is if comparison is equal to 0, meaning that val1 is equal to val2. So then what I'm going to do is take comparison and compare minute 1 with minute 2. And now I do the same thing. If comparison equals -1, then I'm going to print out time 1 is earlier than time 2. And then return. If comparison equals a 1, then I'm going to print out time 1 is later than time 2. Now, hopefully what you've noticed from doing this is that I just typed the exact same code right here. Whenever you're typing the exact same code or you're copying and pasting code, you should always think that there's something better that you can do. It's either going to be in a loop or it's going to be in a function. Now, we're going to move it to a function, but I'm going to do that in just a second. Let's make sure that our program gets working first. So the only time that I'm going to get to this line of code right here is if both the hours are the same and both of the minutes are the same. So now I'm going to compare my seconds. And then same code if comparison is equal to a -1, then I say that time 1 is earlier than time 2 and return. If comparison equals a 1, then I'm going to print out that time 1 is later than time 2 and return. Now, if I get to this line of code right here, what I know is that time 1 and time 2 are the same because the hours, the minutes, and the seconds are all the same. So only if I get to here, I say time 1 and time 2 are the same. Okay? That should do it for our program. Go ahead and save that, build it, run it, check it, make sure that it works. Okay, running my program, and enter the hour. Let's say 11:13 with 5 seconds. Now my second hour, 11:13 with 6 seconds. Time 1's earlier than time 2. There you go. That seems like it worked out just fine. Let's go ahead and run it again. Try entering 2 times that are the same. And it says that they're the same. You can check all of the different cases that we have here with the minutes being different, the hours being different, the seconds being different, or all of them being the same. Those are all the different test cases that we would want. What I want to do now, since we see that it seems like it's working just fine, is I want to take this code that I have right here and move that into a function. Let's just call the function from here instead, okay? We're going to pass in the comparison variable into the function, and we don't need to necessarily return anything. What we're going to do is just we're going to print out what the message is, whether time 1 is earlier than time 2 or whether time 1 is later than time 2. Okay, so let's create another function now, and we'll have it return an int to us, so we'll call it earlier or later, and we'll just have it take one variable, which is going to be my compare variable, my comparison variable. I say if comp equals -1, then I'm going to print out, this is what I had below, that time 1 is earlier than time 2, followed by my new line. We do an else if comp is equal to a 1, then I'm going to do a printf that time 1 is later than time 2. So that's the same code that I have below, except I don't have the return statements. There's a reason that I didn't put the return statements in there. Okay, now the other case is going to be if it's not getting in there and it hasn't gotten in there, then I want to do something different, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to return a 0 if I get in there, return a 0 if I get in there, because I printed out the values, and I'm going to return a 1 if I didn't. Okay, now down here, follow along with what I'm going to do. I'm going to create one more variable, not earlier or later. Okay, so I'll say not earlier or later equals calling this function called earlier or later, passing in my comparison variable. Now, if not earlier or later is equal to 0, that means, if that variable is equal to 0, that means that I printed out the time 1's earlier or later. So what I want to do there is just return. Otherwise, I want to continue on. Like that. Okay. Now it's going to be the same thing again. So put that same code with not earlier or later right here. Pass in comparison again. And it's going to be the same thing. And I'm going to do it one more time. Right there. Same code again, only if I get down to the bottom now, time 1 and time 2 are the same. Now, I might have gone a little quick for you right there. You might need to go back, take a look at the logic, make sure that you understand exactly why this code is working. Let's go ahead and try it out. 11:13:05, 11:13:06. Time 1's earlier than time 2. So far, so good. Let's try when it's the other way around. 11:13:06 with 11:12:06. That means that time 2 is earlier. Time 1 is later. That's correct. And let's go ahead and try it with both of them being the same. And you see that it prints out that they're the same. So this is some interesting work with functions. You see that we have a number of different functions that we're using. We're passing variables into the functions. We're returning values from them. We're making use of those variables down here in our main function. So we're creating functions, using functions, printing them out, using return types. Make sure that you understand this. This is probably a really good program to make sure that you fully understand how functions work. And if you have any questions, let me know. Good luck.